Now, difficult behaviour takes many forms, and you might automatically think of somebody who's strident, noisy, blaming, accusative, and difficult to work with in an overt, noticeable way. But there are other types of behaviour which are just as obstructive and just as awkward. Perhaps the person is very silent, or doesn't interact, or sulks, uses moods, broods, or occasionally bursts into tears, speaks behind your back. You see, the ways that people can be difficult are almost limitless. So I've categorised difficult behaviour into 7 types. Now, I'm going to tell you at other places in the course that I don't want you to start labelling people by giving them names. But we need to find a way of talking about these clusters of behaviour. So just for the purposes of learning and for the purposes of understanding the behaviours we're talking about and how to respond to them, I think it's useful to have some headings. And the first heading, and it's a pretty common one, judging by people I've spoken to over the years, is the steamroller.
Oh, for heaven's sake! Where's the manager? This is nonsense!
The manager's in a meeting. You can always go to our Hotel Brasserie and wait there until your room's ready.
Oh, so I've got to spend money in your restaurant now, have I? Because you can't be bothered to get me a room! Get me a room right now!
The steamroller generally isn't a good listener. They tend to push their own agenda, they tend to overrule other people, and even if they appear to be listening, they're really at the same time just planning the next thing they say so that they can get their own way. It can also be quite hostile and aggressive behaviour, authoritarian behaviour sometimes, and it can appear that the person really doesn't care much about any agenda but their own.
Some of the stuff she says, it's just embarrassing. I hear he left his last school under a bit of a cloud.
Why?
I don't know. I just heard there was some kind of trouble and, he'd been given the push.
The sniper works in a far more subtle and covert way, although the behaviour may be visible. Now, there are 2 forms of sniping that I've come across a lot. One is more prevalent in the workplace, and the other is more prevalent socially or in private life. The first type of sniper behaviour is when you're in a meeting or a presentation and you've got the person in the back row or second row from the front, wherever they happen to be sitting, who's making asides and snide comments and having the odd joke at your expense while you're trying to give your very important presentation. What do you do about that behaviour? Well, mostly we ignore it, we laugh it off, but that doesn't work. They also use humour, but it's a nasty snide sort of humour. So there's a very distinct way of dealing with sniper behaviour. A sniper behaviour that's social tends to be a little less formal, and it might be more direct. It might be undercutting remarks, it might be the odd aside at your expense. Often it's jokey. And one of the key problems with the sniper behaviour is that when you tackle them about it, they'll say something like, "Can't you take a joke?" And that's the double whammy. First of all, you feel bad. Secondly, you can't even take a joke, so you haven't got a sense of humour either.
It's a complete disaster. You and I, we've got to pick up the pieces.
Well, I'm finishing at 12.
Oh no, you're not. We've got to go and get some more food. We'll have to go down to Lorimer's.
The firework is totally unpredictable. They go off in all directions with no warning, no advance notice. 1 minute you're sailing along quite calmly and smoothly with them, and the next you've put your foot in it or you've said something wrong. How on earth do you deal with that sort of behaviour when it's so unpredictable? Well, when you know somebody behaves like this, of course it's no longer unpredictable. You know that they're going to do it, you just don't know when they're going to do it.
Well, I said, there's no way I'm doing that. I mean, you're supposed to get paid a better rate for preparing food. I ain't doing extra work for no money.
The shirkers are a little tricky as well. Maybe they agree to everything you say, say in the workplace situation, it's yes, I'll do this, yes, I'll do that, then they just don't deliver.
Yeah, well, I went to go and speak to my supervisor about it, and by the time I got back, she'd done it all herself. Result or what?
Or perhaps, and I come across this quite often in my work, it's somebody who just keeps dumping their work on somebody else. They just don't pull their weight. And yet, Somehow they always manage to come up smelling of roses, and nobody really spots, except the poor victim who's having the extra work dumped on them, nobody really spots that they're not pulling their weight.
They were awful, really rude people, and they always changed things at the last minute, and they never paid us on time. We had to keep chasing them up. Nightmare.
The downer, as they're called, actually always seems to be the person in the meeting or in the family who comes up with the reason why the thing's not going to work. But sometimes it's worth listening to them. I think there's another very important point. You might be one. About 50% of us are. We're glass half empty people. And there's nothing that's going to make me more persistent and more negative than you telling me that my negative point of view isn't valid.
Yeah, I'll do it.
But you're off on leave next week, Jack.
It's fine, honestly.
The pleaser can be a really useful person to have around because they want to please. They're willing, they're able, they'll be there, they'll deliver, but the problem is they can overcommit. It's very handy to have somebody in your team or in the family who will always do things for you. But a couple of serious problems arise with this. One is they start to overrule other people. So they're in there so quickly, they're adding a response, they're fixing a problem, that you never really have time to delve deeper and see what actually needs fixing. The second point about the pleaser behaviour is they may be depriving others in the group or the family from an opportunity to learn and develop themselves. So while it's very convenient to know somebody who has a pleasing attitude and always wants to get the attention and the reward for being the good guy, it's actually quite undermining for the wider group.
Just email me and tell me what you need to do and I'll sort it out, okay?
And then there's the control freak. Well, I guess we've all known some of those. The subtle thing about control freakery is you don't always spot it until it's too late. These are people who work to their own agenda. Sometimes it's overt and obvious. Other times it's a bit more sneaky. So you have to watch out and deal with it in a certain way. Now, I've talked about 7 common types of behaviour, difficult behaviour. If you want to know specifically how to deal with the steamroller, the sniper, the others that I've spoken about, then you can download the PDF that I've written specifically for that purpose. For now, I'm going to talk more generally about the principles of dealing with difficult behaviour so that you'll have the skills to deal with any sort of behaviour you find obstructive.